The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. I am here with Craig Podolsky, an innovative educator, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself. First off, welcome. Thank you for being here, Craig.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about who you are and your path to becoming a teacher.
Well, to start with who I am, I teach 8th grade students English language arts in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. The path to get here was a little more convoluted. Grew up in the northern suburbs, went to Libertyville High School, went to University of Michigan not to become an educator. Actually went to school to be a sports broadcaster. So immediately out of college, I worked for the hometown, yet my hated rival, the Chicago Bears, because I am originally from the Detroit area. And unfortunately a lifelong Lions fan. And after about a year, I realized that I had missed my calling, missed the boat. I had done a lot of tutoring when I was in college, and I really think that that's where I was intended to go from the beginning. But the draw of Ann Arbor was a little too much, so I gave into that. But as soon as the Bears replaced me with an unpaid intern, I started calling grad schools, ended up at National Louis, where I got my master's and my secondary education teaching certificate. And I am now starting my 14th year in education. I did 3 years of 6th grade, and then this is the start of my 11th year teaching 8th graders.
That's a great path, and being a Bears fan, my father's actually from Detroit as well, so totally understand the Detroit Lions, Chicago Bears thing. Tell us a little bit about, so you've recently created a pretty innovative program where students are going out and getting some authentic education. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that whole project? It's not a small one.
Yeah, it was a little bigger of an undertaking than I had anticipated. We are in the process of creating something called Portrait of a Graduate. It's been established for 3 or 4 years now in District 102 in Buffalo Grove. And one of the aspects of our portrait is to create empathetic global citizens out of our students. And I thought that the best way to do that was to get them out to the community to actually get some hands-on experience, volunteering, raising funds, things like that. So with the addition of our 6th graders last year, our population went up by about 250 kids, and we were left with no real good options for the end of the year field trip. We couldn't go to a bowling alley. We couldn't go to an amusement park. The idea of 500 kids was just a little overwhelming. So what we ended up doing, I requested the day from our administrators. My principal graciously accepted the offer, and we sent 15 different groups a different number of students. I placed 508 students in volunteer slots with the 15 different groups. Feed My Starving Children, Project Linus. We worked with Special Olympics of Illinois. We worked with JDRF. And it was a variety of people staying back and working on projects here that we would then donate, and students getting out into the community to pull invasive species at the forest preserve, to pack boxes at Feed My Starving Children, things like that.
That's honestly a huge undertaking with that amount of students. What were some of the reactions, not only with the community, but the students? You talked a little bit about how they went out, and now they don't have an end of the year kind of fun thing that they were expecting. Tell us a little bit about how that day began and how it ended with the students, and then what kind of community feedback that you got there.
Yeah, so I mean, the rumblings were there because I started working on it about September of 2018 to get everything together. And I had a seventh grade study hall because the eighth graders would already be gone. Those are the students with whom I work. So I started bouncing it off seventh graders, and the ones with whom I had direct contact were very eager. And then they started bringing back, well, so-and-so's not happy because we're not doing anything fun. And, so there was some resistance, but I think that's part of progress. You're making change, you're challenging the status quo. And, one of the things you get with field trips is, why are you going to place X? How does it support education? And with a bowling alley or even a forest preserve, it's really tough to say having a picnic supports education in this way. So with the time and the opportunity, and with the global citizenship aspect of our portrait of a graduate, I said, this is a direct correlation. And a lot of kids were excited, but there was a handful, and I was kind of mission control that day. So I was making sure that the buses were leaving on time. And there were kids that were walking out of the building kind of sullen, why do I have to do this? And then I was also out there to greet them when they came back, and it was excitement and sharing pictures and talking about working at the Smart Farm in Barrington and making lemonade with a bicycle, and how many meals they packed at Feed My Starving Children, and how many backpacks they filled at Fill a Heart for Kids. And what I really wanted was for this to turn into something that transcended school. I want it to become a normal part of their life where volunteering isn't the abnormality, it's the normal process. And already this year, I think we've had 12 to 15 kids volunteer on their own time on the weekend, particularly and recently with JDRF at some of their fundraisers. So it is going better and more smoothly than I had anticipated.
Right, and I'm sure the community is loving that. But was there any pushback from the community? Because I think one of the things that a lot of people will assume is like, oh my gosh, you're unleashing hundreds of kids into the community. There's going to be trouble. Was there any of that? And what kind of feedback then on the community did they give you after this as you're building this program?
I've heard nothing but positive responses. I was receiving emails from parents of students that I didn't even know. My principal was forwarding messages along to me, just showing how excited they were. Our school board got behind it instantly, which I thought was fantastic. Our superintendent of schools, Lori Wilcox, actually joined one of the volunteer groups, and some of the district office administrators came over to school and helped out during the day. I'm still hearing things from people posting it on Facebook and people asking questions about possibly doing it at their grandson or nephew or niece's school and things like that. And when we spoke earlier, I have this image of that last day of school kind of pulling a lever and, like you said, unleashing this force of teenagers out into the world. But rather than out there, shoplifting and tagging buildings and loitering, they're cleaning up parks, they're helping, the elderly, they're pulling invasive species and actually making a difference on the world that they're about to inherit from us.
It's truly an amazing program that you've created. How do you see this kind of changing the way that you and maybe your colleagues are actually teaching students? Have you seen a kind of a shift of, how can we, utilize a little bit more outside / kind of authentic learning environments within our classrooms? Obviously, you said a little bit of talk about it's happening, but what other ways has it changed you as a teacher?
I think that students will buy into things if they understand how it affects and how it applies to their life. I'm an English teacher by trade, and this is not meant to slam math teachers, but the kids that come into my room, when am I ever going to use algebra? Well, you're able to say, here is a situation where you're able to use algebra. And with this, here is a situation where you're able to make a positive impact on the world. And it should be a natural desire for you to do that. I think that with the climate of the country and internationally right now, we need a wealth of young leaders who are willing to take over. I mean, you take a look at recent, what word am I looking for? Activists is the word I'm looking for. You go all the way back to Malala Yousafzai, Cameron Kasky, Emma Gonzalez, and David Hogg of March for Our Lives, Greta Thunberg, Autumn Peltier for climate change, Mari Copeny, Little Miss Flint, trying to get clean water in Flint. And the thing that they all have in common, in addition to being remarkable teenagers and future leaders of the world, is that it's all reactive to a crisis that was forced upon them. They didn't ask for lead in their water in Flint. They didn't ask for climate change to affect their possible futures. They certainly didn't ask for what happened in Parkland. And they're using their skills that aren't necessarily the quantifiable skills. They're more the qualitative skills to make that change. And what I want these kids to realize is you can be just as impactful as that remarkable group of kids, but it doesn't have to be in response to a tragedy. It can be proactive, and they can start making progress in the world.
I love that proactive look, because as an educator as well, we see reactive happen so much, and these students, they have so many ideas, they have so many dreams and things that sometimes we just stop them and say, okay, hold down. So what you're doing is amazing, because you're allowing them to actually go out into the world and actually see it and bring some of their ideas and their lenses into it. Along with this fantastic program, what other ways would you see a positive change in education? What other ways do you think that education could start moving into a change realm for more of this to happen?
I think we need more real world experience. I think back to when I was a teenager, and it was more in high school than it was junior high, but those applicable skills classes, like your home economics, a cooking class, government, I think, was largely important, but I don't know how it was for you. Government, for me, was only a semester class. I would like to see government for a semester to talk about the nuts and bolts, and then I'd like to see a semester of civic responsibility. Why is it important to cast a vote? How do you start change in a grassroots system or at the local level, talking to city councilmen before you move up to talking to state Congress and then federal Congress and so on? And what can you do if you're unhappy with what's going on? I think that the old school system of mentor and apprentice, if we could modernize that and start doing some job shadowing, particularly for the older high school kids, that maybe college isn't A, the best choice, or B, an option. To get them some real world experience where instead of having the argument about how much kids are making and eventually young adults are making minimum wage, put them in a system where they can move up through the ranks and do something and establish something for themselves. And I think that trade schools for too long have gotten a bad name. You want to talk about beauty school or going to, get your certification to be an electrician or a plumber, an auto mechanic, things like that. Those are real jobs that make a real impact on this world. And we've become so ingrained in this mindset that elementary and secondary education is about the grades, because those grades get you to college and college gets you the job. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore.
I totally agree. That's the whole platform of Disrupt Education, and in looking at these different ways that some of them we left behind, like you mentioned, that we need to kind of reiterate and take a look at, how we can bring these things back. Where can people find you online?
I'm not a big fan of social media. That's the English teacher in me. I actually refer to it as anti-social media in my class because I'm worried that we're trending with now emojis and things like that. We're just a few steps away from pointing at things and grunting rather than actually communicating with one another. I do have a Twitter handle. It is at Mr_Poto, which is how I'm referred to here, PODO. That is my Twitter handle. But outside of that, relatively silent on social media.
Under the radar, making huge change out there. So awesome. Craig, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and the vlog today. I appreciate everything you're doing. We're going to continue this conversation about how we can get more kids in some civic opportunities and out in the real world. Thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, next time on Disrupt Education, we're going to be talking to some amazing people. We'll talk to you later.